On to our final round of paper speakers. We have the third speaker for the proposition, Sanam Naraghi Anderlini. Sanam Naraghi Anderlini, MBE, is a director for the Centre of Women's Peace and Security at the London School of Economics. She's the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network, where she spearheads the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, comprising women-led peace-building organizations in 40 countries. In 2000, she was a civil society leader and drafter of the UN Security Council resolution on women, peace, and security. She previously led the UN assessment team into Maoist cantonments in Nepal and was the first gender and inclusion expert appointed to the UN standby team of senior mediation advisors. She also runs a podcast called If You Were in Charge. You have the ears of the House.
A little point of correction, I'm not at the LSE. I decided that I preferred activism to academia, God help me. But thank you very much. It's really lovely to be here with my friends in opposition. I've been listening to the arguments, and what I hear is an amazing level of cynicism, right? The P5 are thugs. We are hostages to them and their balls. The world it is what it is. They're going to do bad things, and so long as they're in a room together, things will be all right. But God forbid we don't have that particular room. Things are going to fall apart. But let's take a look at how things are. Gaza, there is a genocide going on. 2 days ago, Russia vetoed a ceasefire resolution on Sudan. Yesterday, or the day before, the US vetoed another resolution on ceasefire in Gaza. Do these people actually have peace and security? Has the Security Council, specifically the P5, the permanent 5 members who have the veto power, have they actually lived up to their responsibilities? Because with power comes responsibility. When they created the Security Council back in 1945, the assumption was that these 5 powers would take on the responsibility for peace and security for all of humanity. What's happened now is that power and responsibility have somehow become divorced from each other. We have the power, but we're not going to take the responsibility. Not only that, one of the interesting things is that you pay to play. You give money to the UN and you get to be on the Security Council. But let's look at this. The United States, in 2022, gave about $18 billion to the UN, but sold about $51 billion in weapons around the world. The UK, about $3.1 billion to the UN, and sold about $8.5 billion around the world, right? So we actually have the arsonists in the firehouse, and they're making money selling the matchsticks and the fuel as well. So when we say that they are not responsible, they are responsible because it's their weapons that are going out there, and it's their allies that are fueling and funding the wars that they have. Now, you heard earlier that I was involved at the UN and involved in getting the Security Council resolution. Back in the 1990s, my generation, coming into the space, understood that there was a need for reform because we were seeing that wars had changed. It was no longer interstate wars that were threatening peace and security. It was a lot of internal conflicts, genocide in Rwanda, Bosnia, and so forth. And the Security Council didn't have the mandate to intervene in internal wars because it has to respect sovereignty of state and non-interference in the domestic affairs of a country. We watched the Rwandan genocide, which, by the way, was in many ways assisted at...
Watching the genocide,
Yes, 11th of October? 7th of October, are you talking about? It was a terrorist attack in Israel. Thank you very much. So we went into the Security Council because what we saw was that many of the victims of war, of modern day war, are women and children, rape and so forth. And the wars are being fought in people's homes and communities and towns. So we went into the Security Council as activists and said, can we help you expand how you think about this substantively? Instead of just looking at interstate, can we help you think about internal conflicts? Why don't you work with women? Why don't you work with civil society? 10 Security Council resolutions later, we see very little. It's just virtue signaling year in, year out, 25 years on. The Youth Peace and Security Agenda came along. Young people should be involved. Same thing, lots of virtue signaling. Responsibility to protect was another one. If a country is killing its own people, the Security Council should step in. What did we do? We created even more of a mess in Libya. So substantively, we tried to do the reforms, and the Security Council didn't uphold its responsibility. In 2013, the French came along and said, let's change the rules around veto. Let's agree voluntarily that if there are atrocities being committed, we will not use the veto. Makes sense. That was 2013. We're now in 2024, and look what's happening with Sudan and Ukraine and Gaza, right? And then we talk about this reform. You know, we have 5 permanent members. Let's add a few more, Japan and India and Brazil and Germany. We already have 47% of permanent members, representing 17% of the world's population, are European, West, the US and Europe. Why should Germany, France, and Britain have permanent seats? And as our colleague said, oh, the Africans can decide for themselves what to do or what not to do. Who are they going to have? And, you know, is it Brazil or is it Mexico? What about Saudi Arabia? So it's been, since 2005 at least, there's been this conversation about expanding the membership, and they haven't gotten anywhere. That's 20 years. So reform efforts of the existing structure have not worked. Now, if we go back to the original history, the creators of the UN and the UN Charter, the mothers and fathers of the United Nations, imagined a future where future generations didn't have to live through the scourge of war. They imagined this. And if we disband the Security Council, it doesn't mean we disband the UN. It doesn't mean we disband the committees where the peacekeeping operations happen or sanctions discussions are happening. Or frankly, we could revive the Military Staff Committee, which was meant to review armament sales and things like that. There's lots of structures there where these parties could come together, and we give the responsibility to imagining the future to the existing members of the UN and to future generations. To suggest that we have to live with the cynicism of the present is really patronizing and really offensive to the young generations and the young people who are actually the victims, either as soldiers or as civilians, of the wars that are being perpetrated because of the irresponsibility of the Permanent Five. So let's disband, let's rip it up and start again. We can do that. We can imagine it. Why not? Thank you.